Every culture on Earth looked at the same animals and turned them into gods, monsters, and guardians. In this video we go through different animal types, from insects to horses to fish, and for each one I picked the single most powerful mythical creature that came out of it. Before we get into it, hit the like button if you're into mythology and folklore from around the world. This channel covers creatures, legends, and cryptids from every culture. Alright, let's get into it. Let's start small, or at least it looks small from far away. Sailors in Arabic lore had the rule: if you see an island in open water that wasn't on any map, don't land on it. The story goes like this: a ship crosses open sea for weeks. No land anywhere. Then finally something breaks the horizon. An island. Rock, sand, even trees growing on it. The crew is relieved. They row over, they climb out, and they start doing what sailors do after weeks at sea. They set up camp. They build a fire, and that's when the ground starts to move. What they landed on was never an island. It was the back of ZARATAN, a crab so massive that centuries of sand and dust had settled on its shell, enough for plants to take root. The creature has been resting near the surface for so long that it looked permanent. It looked safe. Once the fire touches its back, ZARATAN wakes up, and it dives. Here's what gets me about this one. ZARATAN is a monster that never has to chase anyone. It just rests, and the danger shows up entirely because of the choices you already made. You already landed, you already lit the fire. I think that's why this legend stuck with sailors for so long. The ocean already hides things you can't see. ZARATAN takes that fear and turns it into something you can actually stand on. Something that feels solid right up until it isn't. Now let's go even smaller, and this time the story flips completely. In ancient Egypt, people watched scarab beetles do something strange every single day. A beetle finds a piece of dung, shapes it into a ball and pushes it across the ground, sometimes for hours, always in a straight line. To the Egyptians, that motion looked familiar. It looked like the sun crossing the sky. So they built a god around it. KHEPRI is usually shown as a scarab, or as a man with a scarab for a head. His job is enormous. Every morning he pushes the sun up over the horizon. Every evening he pushes it back down, and somewhere in the dark hours between sunset and sunrise, he's still working, rolling the sun through the underworld so it can rise again the next day. The name itself comes from the Egyptian word for to come into being. KHEPRI's role went beyond simply moving the sun. Every sunrise was proof that he was actively making it happen, pushing existence itself back into the world one morning at a time. What I find fascinating here is the leap the Egyptians made. They watched an insect everyone considered the pest doing something automatic and repetitive, and they saw the entire universe reflected in it. Creation, renewal, the sun coming back after a night of complete darkness. All of that packed into a bug pushing dung across the sand. It says something about how ancient people looked at the world. Nothing was too small to carry meaning. Sometimes the biggest ideas came from the tiniest, most overlooked places. This one starts with pride, and pride never ends well in Greek mythology. Orion was the greatest hunter alive. Everyone knew it, and eventually Orion started saying it out loud. He bragged that he could kill every animal on Earth. That's a dangerous thing to say when gods are listening. Some versions of the story blame Gaia, the Earth herself, offended by the idea that one man could wipe out every creature she made. Other versions point to Artemis. Either way, the answer to Orion's bragging was the same. Something needed to bring him down, and it needed to come from the ground, something he didn't expect. A giant scorpion was sent after him. Orion, the hunter who feared nothing, never saw it coming. The scorpion caught him off guard and delivered a sting powerful enough to kill him instantly. The greatest hunter in the world, taken down by one of the smallest creatures he probably never even considered a threat. The gods placed both of them in the sky afterward. Orion became a constellation. The scorpion became one too, known today as Scorpius. And here's the detail I love most. The two constellations sit on opposite sides of the sky. When Scorpius rises, Orion sets. They're positioned so they can never appear at the same time, as if the chase from that night is still happening, stretched out across the entire year. This is a story about scale. Orion measured danger in size and strength, and he judged the scorpion as beneath his attention. That single assumption is exactly what got him killed. Now we get to my favorite kind of mythological figure, the trickster. Anansi comes from the West African folklore, specifically the Akan people of Ghana, and he's a spider who also happens to be one of the smartest characters in any mythology I've covered on this channel. He talks, he schemes, he outsmarts gods, kings and creatures many times his size, using nothing but his own wit. There's one story that explains where all stories come from, and it involves Anansi directly. The sky god Nyame owned every story in the world, locked away and guarded closely. Anansi wanted them, so he made a deal. He would capture 3 of the most dangerous creatures around, a python, a leopard, and a swarm of hornets, and hand them over in exchange for the stories. Everyone assumed Anansi would fail. A spider catching a leopard sounds impossible. He pulled it off anyway, using tricks specific to each creature. He challenged the python to prove how long he really was by stretching out against a branch, then tied him down mid-boast. He dug a pit and lured the leopard in. He convinced the hornets that it was raining outside and offered his own web as a shelter, then sealed them in the moment they flew inside. Nyame kept his word. Anansi walked away with every story in the world, and that's supposedly why storytelling exists at all. Every tale, every legend traces back to a spider who talked his way past 3 creatures that should have killed him. I like that Anansi never wins through strength. He wins by understanding exactly what each opponent believes about itself, then using that belief as the trap. Some legends grow out of real fear. Sailors crossing open ocean far from any coastline, terrified of what might be out there. The rock comes straight out of that fear, and it takes it to an extreme. Arabian mythology describes the rock as a bird so enormous it could lift a fully grown elephant off the ground and carry it away in its talons like a piece of prey. Its wingspan alone was said to block out the sun when it flew overhead, turning day into shadow in seconds. Sailors told stories of entire ships vanishing, lifted straight out of the water and dropped somewhere far away, crew and cargo gone without a trace. One of the most famous accounts comes from Sinbad the sailor, stranded on an island after a shipwreck, who spots an enormous white dome in the distance. He assumes it's a building. It turns out to be a single rock egg. When the bird itself returns to sit on it, Sinbad ties himself to one of its legs, hoping to escape the island by riding along wherever it flies next. The plan works about as well as you'd expect tying yourself to a wild animal usually goes. Marco Polo later claimed reports of a similar creature came out of Madagascar, describing feathers supposedly 12 paces long. Whether any of that was based on a real sighting or pure exaggeration passed between traders, the story kept spreading for centuries. What makes the rock effective is the size of the ocean itself. When you're weeks away from any coastline in a small wooden ship completely at the mercy of wind and water, the idea that something could rise out of nowhere and simply take you feels believable. The rock gives a shape to that helplessness. It turns the ocean is dangerous into something you can actually picture, talons and all. Greek mythology has plenty of monsters built purely to scare people. The harpies were built to punish them. Described as women with the wings, talons and sometimes the faces of birds, the harpies served the gods directly, sent out whenever someone needed to be taught a lesson the hard way. Their favorite method was food. They would swoop down on a meal, steal most of it and foul whatever they left behind over and over until their target starved. The clearest example of this comes from the story of Phineus, a king who Zeus punished for revealing too much of the future to mortals. Phineus was blinded and cursed with endless hunger, but every time food was placed in front of him, the harpies arrived first. They snatched what they could and ruined the rest, leaving him tormented meal after meal, unable to ever actually eat. The punishment eventually ended when the Argonauts passed through and chased the harpies off. But for years, Phineus lived exactly like that. What makes the harpies unsettling comes down to the waiting more than the attack itself. They don't strike immediately. They circle, they watch, and they choose the exact moment when hope is highest, right as the food is finally within reach, to take it away. The timing turns them into something closer to a curse with wings than a simple predator. I think that's the real function of the harpies in Greek mythology. They weren't there to kill, they were there to make sure a punishment never actually ended, showing up again and again just as things start to feel normal. Not every mythological creature exists to threaten someone. Some exist to serve. In Norse mythology, Odin, the king of the gods, relies on two ravens named HUGINN and MUNINN. Their names translate roughly to thought and memory, and every single day they leave Odin's side and fly out across the entire world. They watch, they listen, and when the day ends, they return to Odin's shoulders and tell him everything they saw. This is how Odin knows what's happening everywhere at once, despite being one being in one place. His ravens act as his eyes across 9 different realms, covering ground he could never physically reach on his own. Odin himself is described as anxious about their return each evening, worried that one day they might simply not come back, taking thought and memory away from him permanently. There's a detail in the old poems where Odin openly admits this fear. He says he worries more about Muninn's safe return than Huginn's, showing that even a god understands how much he depends on his own memory staying intact. Losing thought is frightening, losing the ability to remember is worse. What I like about Huginn and Muninn is how differently they use fear compared to most creatures on this list. There's no danger in encountering them directly. The threat lives entirely on Odin's side, in the quiet possibility that his own awareness of the world could simply fly away one day and choose not to return. It turns 2 ordinary-looking birds into something that represents the fragile line between knowing everything and knowing nothing at all. Japan gives the fox one of the richest reputations in any mythology. The kitsune exists here as a spirit capable of living for centuries and growing more powerful with every year that passes. The clearest sign of that power shows up in its tails. A young kitsune starts with 1, like any ordinary fox. But as it ages and gains wisdom, it can grow more, up to 9 in total. A 9-tailed kitsune is ancient, dangerous, and often nearly impossible to deceive or defeat, since it usually understands exactly what a human is thinking before they act. Kitsune can shapeshift into human form, most often appearing as a beautiful woman. And this is where their stories split into 2 very different directions. Some kitsune form genuine bonds with humans, marrying them, protecting their household, and staying loyal for generations. Others use the same human disguise purely to manipulate, luring people in for entertainment, or worse, feeding on their energy and leaving them worse off than before. One recurring detail across many stories involves small physical signs that give a kitsune away, even in human form. A shadow shaped wrong, a reflection that shows fur instead of skin, a fondness for fried tofu that seems oddly specific for someone pretending to be an ordinary person. The disguise is convincing but rarely perfect. What makes kitsune stand out to me is how much variation exists inside one single creature type. You could meet a kitsune who saves your family for 3 generations, or one who ruins your life in a single evening, and there's no way to know in advance which one you're dealing with. That uncertainty is the entire point. Every mythology needs at least one guardian nobody can get past, and Greek mythology built one of the best. Cerberus stands at the gate of the underworld, and his job description is simple: keep the dead inside and keep the living out. 3 heads sit on one body, each one alert independently. That design alone made Cerberus nearly impossible to sneak past, since even if you distracted one head, 2 more remained fully awake and watching. Some descriptions add a mane made of living snakes and a tail that ends in a serpent's head as well, turning an already intimidating dog into something closer to a walking arsenal. Very few heroes ever managed to get past him. Orpheus supposedly calmed Cerberus with music, playing until all 3 heads grew drowsy enough to let him through. Heracles took the opposite approach entirely, wrestling Cerberus into submission with raw strength as the final of his 12 labors, dragging the beast up to the surface world before eventually returning him to his post. Here's the detail that stands out to me most. Cerberus never actually hunts. He guards a single fixed location and remains there permanently, which makes him function like a living law rather than a predator stalking prey. The gate exists, the rule exists, and Cerberus simply enforces it, day after day, as long as the underworld itself continues to exist. That's what makes him different from most monsters on this list. Cerberus represents a boundary given teeth. The order of the entire underworld depends on a 3-headed dog staying awake and staying put. Heracles spent his life paying for something he didn't fully choose, 12 labors handed to him as punishment, and the very first one nearly broke the entire plan before it started. The NEMEAN line terrorized the region around Nemea, killing anyone who crossed its path. What made it truly dangerous had little to do with size or speed. Its golden fur was completely impenetrable. Arrows bounced off, swords couldn't cut through it. Every weapon Heracles tried simply failed against skin that treated metal like nothing at all. So, he adapted. Heracles tracked the lion back to its cave, a space with 2 entrances, and sealed one of them completely. That forced a direct confrontation on his terms instead of the lion's. Once the fight moved into close quarters, he abandoned his weapons entirely and wrestled the creature with his bare hands, eventually locking his arm around its neck and choking it until it stopped moving. The fur that no weapon could pierce turned out to have one weakness: the lion's own claws. Heracles used them to skin the animal after the fight, and he wore that pelt for the rest of his life, turning the one material that had defeated every blade into armor that made him even harder to kill. The lion was placed in the sky afterward as the constellation Leo, a permanent reminder of the fight that opened Heracles' entire path to becoming a legend. What stays with me about this one is the lesson Heracles had to learn immediately. Strength alone solved nothing here. The moment he stopped trying to overpower the lion directly and started thinking about its cave, its escape routes, and its one real vulnerability, that's the moment the fight actually turned into its favor. Alright, let's pause here for a second because I want to point something out. Looking back at the first 10 creatures we just went through, a crab, a beetle, a scorpion, a spider, a bird, 2 ravens, a fox, a dog, a lion, every single one of these started as an animal people actually saw in their daily lives. Something small enough or common enough to walk right past without a second thought. And every single culture did the exact same thing with that animal. They looked at something ordinary and they asked, what if this thing was bigger than it looks? What if it's smarter, older, or more powerful than we assume? A crab becomes an island, a beetle becomes the reason the sun rises, a dog becomes the only thing standing between the living world and the dead. That's the pattern I keep coming back to on this channel. Mythology rarely invents creatures out of nothing. It takes what's already right in front of people and it asks what that animal would look like if every assumption about it was wrong. We've got several more categories to go, and some of the creatures coming up push that idea even further. But before we keep going, if you want access to these episodes a full day before anyone else, plus clips and breakdowns of cryptids and mythology I don't post anywhere else, that's all on my Patreon. Links in the description. Alright, back to the myths. Greek mythology has a recurring theme where the punishment lands on the person who did the least wrong, and Callisto's story is one of the clearest examples of that. Callisto was a nymph, sworn to Artemis and dedicated to a life away from romantic relationships. Zeus took notice of her anyway and disguised himself to get close, leading to Callisto becoming pregnant against her will. When Hera found out, her anger fell entirely on Callisto rather than Zeus. Hera transformed her into a bear, stripping away her human form and leaving her trapped in the body of an animal, wandering the forest she used to walk through as a person. Years passed. Callisto's son, Arcas, grew up as a skilled hunter, and one day he came across a bear in the woods without any idea it was his own mother. He raised his spear, seconds away from killing her without ever knowing who she truly was. Zeus intervened before that happened, sweeping both of them up into the sky and placing them among the stars permanently. Callisto became Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Arcas became Ursa Minor, positioned right beside her. Mother and son locked together in the sky for good, close enough to see each other, but never able to speak. What makes this story land differently than most is where the blame actually falls. Callisto did nothing to invite what happened to her, and she still paid for it twice. Once through the transformation, and again through nearly dying at the hands of her own child. The stars offered her permanence, but they never offered her justice. She simply got frozen in place forever right next to the one person who almost ended her life without knowing it. Some creatures scare you with claws or size. The Satori scares you with something far quieter. Japanese folklore places the Satori deep in the mountains, an ape-like creature that walks upright and moves through forests the way a person might. Its real danger has nothing to do with strength. The Satori reads minds. It knows exactly what a traveler is thinking and it says those thoughts out loud, word for word, the moment they cross the person's mind. Picture walking alone through a mountain path and suddenly encountering this creature. Before you can speak, it tells you exactly what you are about to think. Then it does it again with your next thought. And again, every attempt to plan an escape, every flicker of fear crossing your mind gets spoken back to you in real time, calmly, like it's reading a script you didn't know you were writing. Several old stories describe travelers who tried to outsmart a Satori through pure logic, only to watch each new plan get repeated back before they finished forming it. In some versions, the encounter ends when the person stops thinking entirely, chopping wood or focusing completely on some physical task, and a stray piece of wood accidentally flies off and strikes the creature, scaring it away. The escape works only when the mind goes quiet enough that there's nothing left to read. That's what makes the Satori unsettling to me. Most creatures on this list threaten your body. This one threatens something much more personal, the one space you assume always belongs to you alone. Your own thoughts exposed the instant they form, with absolutely nowhere left to hide them. Some creatures are born as monsters. The Minotaur was created as punishment, and the punishment landed on someone who had nothing to do with the original offense. King Minos of Crete asked Poseidon for a sign of favor, and Poseidon sent a magnificent white bull expecting Minos to sacrifice it in return. Minos kept the bull for himself instead, and Poseidon's response was severe. He cursed Minos' wife with an overwhelming desire for the animal itself. What resulted from that curse was the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, born innocent but shaped entirely by a punishment meant for someone else. Minos couldn't kill the Minotaur outright, and he couldn't let it walk free either. His solution was the labyrinth, an enormous maze built specifically to contain the creature, with passages designed to confuse anyone who entered well enough that finding the way back out became nearly impossible. Every few years, Athens sent a tribute of young men and women into the maze, sacrifices meant to satisfy Minos and feed the Minotaur trapped at its center. Theseus eventually volunteered to enter the labyrinth himself, and with the help of Ariadne, who gave him a ball of thread to unwind as he walked, he found his way to the center, killed the Minotaur, and used the thread to retrace his steps back. What sticks with me about this story is how much responsibility gets shifted around before it even reaches the Minotaur itself. Minos broke a promise to a god. Poseidon punished a woman who had no say in the matter. And the creature born from all of it, the one everyone feared and eventually killed, never made a single choice that led to any of it happening. Some monsters get built by combining the worst part of several animals into one body, and the Chimera is the clearest example Greek mythology ever produced. Descriptions place the body and the head of a lion at the front, a goat's head rising directly out of its back, and a serpent for a tail, capable of striking on its own, like a separate creature entirely. Fire breathes from the lion's mouth, meaning the Chimera attacks from 3 completely different angles at once, each part functioning almost independently from the others. The Chimera terrorized the region of Lycia, burning through farmland and killing anyone who came near, until the king sent the hero Bellerophon to deal with it. Bellerophon had one major advantage most fighters didn't. He rode Pegasus, the winged horse, giving him the ability to attack from directly above, completely outside the reach of the Chimera's claws and bite. Even from the air, the fire posed a serious problem. Bellerophon's solution came down to one clever trick. He attached a block of lead to the tip of his spear and drove it directly into the Chimera's fire-breathing mouth. The intense heat melted the lead instantly, and the creature ended up suffocating on its own weapon. The very fire that made it so dangerous turned completely against it. What makes the Chimera so effective as a monster comes down to the goat piece specifically. A lion alone is already a serious threat, and the serpent tail adds another. But the goat head breaks the entire logic of the creature, an animal usually seen as mild and unthreatening, fused into something built purely for destruction. This mismatch is exactly what makes the Chimera feel so wrong to look at, like nature broke its own rules, just to put this one thing together. Not every creature on this list exists to threaten or punish someone. Pegasus stands out as one of the rare exceptions, a symbol of freedom born out of something genuinely horrific. Pegasus emerged from the blood of Medusa the moment Perseus beheaded her. From that violent origin came a winged horse, pure white, capable of flying between the earth and the heavens with total ease. Zeus claimed him early on, using Pegasus to carry his thunderbolts across the sky. And that connection to the king of the gods gave the horse a kind of untouchable status among mortals. The hero Bellerophon eventually captured Pegasus with help from Athena, who gave him a golden bridle specifically designed to tame the horse. Together they accomplished incredible feats, including the fight against the Chimera we just covered, striking from the air in a way no ground-based hero ever could. Bellerophon's story takes a sharp turn from there. Success made him overly confident, and he eventually tried to ride Pegasus all the way up to Mount Olympus itself, attempting to join the gods as an equal. Zeus responded by sending a single insect to sting Pegasus mid-flight. The horse balked, Bellerophon fell back down to earth, and Pegasus continued upward alone, eventually settling permanently among the gods and later becoming a constellation. What I find compelling about Pegasus is how the story splits between its two riders. Zeus used him for divine work, thunderbolts, and purpose. Bellerophon used him to chase glory that reached too far. The horse himself never changed at all. Pegasus simply carried whoever sat on his back toward wherever their ambition was pointed, sometimes toward the heavens and sometimes toward the fall neither of them saw coming. Japan sits on some of the most active fault lines on the planet, and centuries ago people needed an explanation for why the ground kept shaking beneath them. That explanation came in form of an enormous catfish. NAMAZU lives deep underground according to the old stories, coiled beneath the Japanese islands in the mud and darkness below the surface. The catfish moves the way any animal moves, shifting position, twisting, reacting to its surroundings, driven by instinct rather than anger or malice, and the destruction above ground is simply a side effect of something happening far beneath it. To keep NAMAZU still, the god Kashima stands guard with a massive stone called the Kaname-ishi, pressing down directly on top of the catfish and pinning it in place. As long as Kashima keeps the stone in position, NAMAZU stays calm and the ground stays steady. The moment Kashima's attention drifts, even briefly, NAMAZU senses the opening and thrashes, and the earth shakes in response. This belief became so widespread that after major earthquakes, woodblock prints called Namazu-e appeared, showing the catfish being punished, restrained or mocked by crowds of people. A way of processing disaster through image and story rather than through science that didn't exist yet. What strikes me most about Namazu is how the myth places responsibility somewhere oddly comforting. An earthquake isn't random chaos with no explanation behind it. It's a massive creature reacting to the world around it, kept in check by a god whose job is to stay alert. When the ground shakes, the story says exactly why, and exactly whose attention slipped at that exact moment. Norse mythology built an entire structure of the universe around one massive tree, and somewhere inside that structure, one small squirrel spends every single day stirring up trouble on purpose. Yggdrasil, the word tree, connects all 9 realms of Norse cosmology, stretching from the underworld all the way up to the heavens. At the very top sits a great eagle watching over everything. Deep in the roots below lives Nidhogg, a massive serpent that spends eternity gnawing at the tree's foundation. Ratatoskr runs constantly along the trunk between them, moving up and down the entire length of Yggdrasil, carrying messages from one to the other. Here's where it gets interesting. Ratatoskr twists every word passed between the eagle at the top and the serpent at the bottom, exaggerating, rewarding, and turning it into something far more insulting than what was originally said. The eagle and the serpent have likely never spoken to each other directly in the entire mythology. Everything they know about one another passes through Ratatoskr first, and Ratatoskr clearly enjoys keeping that hostility alive. Some readings of the myth treat Ratatoskr as nothing more than a background detail, comic relief inside a much larger and more serious cosmic structure. Other interpretations go further, suggesting that Ratatoskr represents something closer to gossip itself, small, seemingly harmless, yet powerful enough to keep two massive beings locked in conflict for eternity, simply through repeated distortion. What draws me to this one is the scale of the mismatch. 9 realms, a serpent, a godlike eagle, an entire cosmic tree holding the universe together, and somewhere in the middle of all of that grandeur, the ongoing tension gets fueled by one squirrel who just likes stirring things up. Every culture with a coastline eventually built a story about something massive living beneath the waves, and Scandinavian legend produced one of the most enduring versions ever told. The Kraken lived deep in the North Atlantic, and descriptions of its size grew more extreme with each generation of sailors who passed the story along. Some accounts claimed its body alone stretched over a mile across, large enough that ships sometimes mistook it for an island rising out of the water. Sailors told stories of anchoring near what they believed was solid land, only to feel the ground shift beneath them as the creature began to submerge again, dragging everything on its back straight down into the depths. Its tentacles posed just as much danger as its size. Descriptions from Norwegian sailors detailed massive arms capable of wrapping entirely around a ship's hull and pulling the whole vessel underwater in seconds, crew included. Even when the Kraken wasn't directly attacking, its movement alone created danger. The whirlpool left behind as it submerged was said to be powerful enough to pull nearby ships down with it, meaning a boat could be destroyed by the Kraken without the creature ever making direct contact at all. Some old fishermen actually welcomed the Kraken's presence in a strange way. Its massive body was believed to push enormous schools of fish up toward the surface as it moved, and sailors who recognized the signs, usually calm water followed by sudden turbulence, would rush to fish that exact spot before the creature submerged again, reward and danger sitting directly on top of each other. What makes the Kraken so effective as a legend is the sheer scale of the ocean it comes from. Sailors already knew they were crossing something vast and mostly unmapped. The Kraken simply gave the vastness teeth, turning empty water into something that might be watching, waiting, just below the surface for the right moment to rise. Some creatures threaten a village, some threaten a kingdom. Jormungandr threatens the entire structure of existence itself. Norse mythology describes Jormungandr as a serpent so massive that it circles the whole world, lying coiled beneath the ocean with its body stretched so far that its tail eventually reaches all the way back around to its own mouth. Odin threw the serpent into the sea himself early in its life, hoping to keep it contained and away from the 9 realms. Instead, Jormungandr simply kept growing until its body became the boundary of the world itself, the ocean floor its permanent home. Thor and Jormungandr share one of the most personal rivalries in all of Norse mythology. Their most famous encounter happens during a fishing trip when Thor, disguised as a giant serpent, rows out into open water and baits his line with an entire ox head. Jormungandr takes the bait and Thor very nearly manages to pull the serpent straight out of the ocean before the giant he's traveling with panics and cuts the line, letting Jormungandr sink back into the depths at the last possible moment. Their true final battle waits for Ragnarok, the end of the world in Norse belief. When the day arrives, Jormungandr releases its grip of its own tail and rises from the ocean, poisoning the sky and the sea as it moves toward land. Thor kills the serpent in the fight that follows, finally settling their rivalry for good. The victory costs him everything. Jormungandr's venom works fast enough that Thor only manages 9 steps away from the serpent's body before collapsing himself. What makes Jormungandr different from every other creature on this list is what his existence actually signals. As long as the serpent stays coiled around the world, holding its own tail in its mouth, the world stays intact. The moment it lets go, everything ends. One creature quietly wrapped around the edge of reality, and the entire fate of existence depends on it simply staying still. So that's all. We talked about different animals pulled from cultures across Europe, Asia and Africa, and yet the pattern behind almost every single one stays the same. Humans look at something ordinary, something they already live alongside every day, and they ask one simple question. What if this thing carries more power than it looks like it does? A crab holding up an entire island. A squirrel quietly fueling a conflict between a god and a serpent. A dog enforcing the one rule the entire underworld depends on. Different animals, different continents, different centuries, and somehow the same instinct shows up again and again. If there's one thing this tells me, it's that mythology was never really about the animals themselves. It was about people trying to explain why the world felt much bigger and stranger than what they could see with their own eyes. Every culture on this list looked at the same basic problem and solved it the same way, by taking something small and asking how big it could actually get. So here's what I want to know. Out of all these mythical creatures, which one would you least want to run into? Drop it in the comments, I read every single one.